O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the...
Welcome to the King's Hand in History. I'm Chris Van Dusen, your royal bard, to proclaim to you the King's glorious deeds. On this episode, we are continuing our look at the American Revolution in honor of the 250th anniversary of that revolution. I'm actually skipping over the revolution itself and including in this American history topic something that happened on July 13th of 1787, 262 years ago, which was the passing of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 by the Congress of the Confederation of the United States, which had been going on since they had declared independence and since they had adopted the Articles of Confederation in 1777, but not until the later than that, I forgot which date it was. They finally, all of the states approved that they would be under the Articles of Confederation. So at this time, the United States was not under the United States Constitution, but the Articles of Confederation, which was kind of the first constitution that they drafted together. And the War of Independence ended officially in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris, signed by the Americans and the British, and the French were included as well. And with that treaty, the United States gained a bunch of territory that was hemmed in by the Mississippi and Ohio rivers. The Ohio River being the eastern border, and if you have a picture of it, or if you don't want to look it up, it looks like a V that's opening up towards the northeast, with the Ohio River on the southeastern border of this territory, and the Mississippi River being on the western border of this territory, and the Great Lakes on the northern end of it. It was hundreds of thousands of miles of land that it was unsettled, although there were settlers there, as I'm going to describe a little bit later. But this land now needed to be divvied up. It needed to be settled, and Congress, the Congress of Confederation, needed to pay off their debts they had incurred from the war effort. During the war, the Continental Congress had been just simply printing money that they could not back up, and the idea was they would eventually pay back those that they owed for the money. And they also owed a bunch of soldiers money, because when the Continental Army disbanded in 1783, this left thousands of soldiers who had been promised pay and had not gotten their pay entirely. This left them with pay that was owed to them by the Continental Congress. So the Congress of Confederation, as it was called under the Articles of Confederation, it was in great distress. It was in great debt. It had a bunch of frustrated soldiers that were asking for their money, and also the state legislatures, when they had enlisted militias, many of the militiamen were promised bounties of land in this western territory in exchange for their service in the war. So they also owed money, these states, to the not money, but land to these soldiers that had fought in the war. There were a couple of other complications to the issue of this territory, this vast territory in the Northwest. First of all, the American Indians were there still, and they had their lands there. And so how would they be able to settle it if they had Native Americans there? Well, they needed to strike up deals with them. They needed to make sure that they could have peace negotiations with them. And also, another big issue at this point in time, in 1787, while they are discussing the Northwest Ordinance in the Continental Congress, well, the Confederation Congress, actually, which was officially called the United States in Congress assembled. While they were discussing this, they had to solve the problem of states that had claims in this territory, that had gone as far as the drafting of their state constitutions, most notably the state of Virginia, which had the most land claims in the Northwest Territory. And so Virginia was asked to cede this territory. In fact, all of the states were asked to cede this territory. However, people who had claims already in the territories, such as, for example, George Washington, they were allowed to have their lands still in there. But what the plan was in this ordinance was to make the states relinquish their claims in the land, and then to bring it entirely under the authority of the Congress of Confederation, so that the national government could deal with it. And in the meantime, while this Congress was meeting, I believe in New York, where was it? New York or Boston? I think it might have been Boston. It was not Philadelphia, though, because in Philadelphia, meanwhile, there was another convention being held, the Constitutional Convention, as they were discussing and they were drafting the new Constitution, which would be shortly after the Northwest Ordinance agreed upon and established for the United States. And so, to give you an idea again of this land we're talking about in the Northwest, it is the land that is now occupied by the states of Minnesota, starting from west to east: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. In 1784, a year after the Treaty of Paris, the Constitutional Congress had made efforts at settling and selling this land. In fact, Thomas Jefferson had drafted a plan called the Ordinance of 1784 to divvy up the land in there for settlement. However, it was not detailed enough, and it did not make a thorough and well thought out set of steps that were necessary for these territories to be settled, to have the land sold, and then for the territories to eventually be turned into states. So the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, what it did was establish a way in which new territories, as the United States expanded westward, could be formed into new states, could have their state governments, could be represented in Congress. Now, remember, again, this is 1787 we're talking about. This is 4 years after the end of the Revolution, when the Continental Army had disbanded. And many of these soldiers had actually moved west, not just soldiers, but civilians, inhabitants of the states further east. They had moved into this territory, and they were what was called squatters, who did not have legal claims to this land, but simply went there to just settle on the land, to build their houses and to farm the land and to start a new life there. Again, remember, this is wilderness territory for the most part. It has very few towns or settlements. Besides the Native American villages, it is mostly untamed wilderness. Today, you go there, and there are many cities. But back then, you have to think of a virgin wilderness for the most part. Tons of trees. They have to clear the land. There are Indians all around. And it is a dangerous, it's a very inhospitable and hard environment to live in. So these people that settled there, they were tough people. They had to start from scratch. They had to, again, build their own homes. They had to clear the land for farmland. And so we're talking about frontier life here. Now, back to the Congress of Confederation. The president of the Congress of Confederation in 1787, they were there, and they were looking again to improve upon, to perfect a ordinance for the territory there. In 1784, again, Thomas Jefferson had drafted a set of guidelines for the settlement of the land. And then in 1785, there was this Ordinance of 1785, which was drafted by James Monroe of, I think he was of Virginia. So the Native Americans there were resisting giving up their land. Remember, before they even settled there, they were what's called surveyors. And at this time, even before they were talking about drafting this Northwest Ordinance of 1787, they had sent out surveyors, and they had also a bunch of Revolutionary War officers had formed together into a Ohio company that would deal with getting the land and selling it, well, buying and selling the land to settlers. The Ohio Company was headed by Reverend Manasseh Cutler, and Cutler and the Ohio Company had set up surveyors, and they had gotten opposition from the Indians there as they were trying to divide up the land for settlers. And at this time, the land, it was being sold for $1 per acre, but you had to buy 640 acres total. $640. Most settlers could not afford that. And so the way that they would do this was through this Ohio company facilitating the settlement of it, and also wealthy landowners there being able to sell it to people. And Manasseh Cutler, back to him, again, he was the head of the Ohio Company, and he was allowed to accompany the drafting of this new ordinance in 1787, along with the president, who was Arthur St. Clair, who would later be the governor of the territory. And so they are on committees. They are talking throughout this time of July of 1787. And there was a specific committee of several men who were assigned the duty of drafting this ordinance. So a set of laws, the plan for settling this territory. It consisted of Richard Henry Lee from Virginia, John Keene, Langton Smith, and let's see here. Excuse me. That was the 1784 ordinance. But the president was Arthur St. Clair still for this ordinance of 1787. The draft was originally penned by Massachusetts delegate Dane. I forgot what his first name was. Nathan Dane, along with another delegate named Rufus King. And they were taking some things from Thomas Jefferson from the 1784 draft or ordinance, but for the most part, it was entirely new stuff that they were writing up in this ordinance. Again, the head of the Ohio Company, the Reverend Cutler, he was alongside them, and he actually included in the ordinance the section that talks about religious liberty. So this, again, this is before the Constitution has been totally drafted. And so the new Northwest Ordinance was really, it was kind of a stepping stone towards the Constitution, because the Northwest Ordinance included the first Bill of Rights, really, for the citizens of the territories there, that would be later improved upon in the Constitution. There were some hesitancies about how they would go about making rules for this territory. For example, the southern states, which were mostly slaveholding states, it was thought that they would not be too keen on having slavery be banned in the new territory, whereas the northern states, who during the Revolution, they had mostly in their state, when they had drafted their state constitutions, they had banned slavery. So they didn't want slavery either in this Northwest Territory. So when the ordinance was originally presented to the Congress, this article about banning slavery was left out. And then once it was seen that it was going to be a good idea, that the southern states were friendly towards the most of the ordinance. It was added, and then there was a unanimous vote for the ordinance, and it was passed on July 13th of 1787. So I think in the next section of the podcast, I'd like to simply go over some of the things included in the ordinance and point out to you notable elements of rights that are based on the natural rights included in the Declaration of Independence, to point out to you the way that it enforces education and religion, and also to show you its prohibition of slavery. So we'll take a short break and then come back with the Northwest Ordinance itself of 1787. Hey, do you enjoy studying the Bible, reading it, and learning what it means to follow Jesus and obey him faithfully? Well, I have a blog called bearingchrist.blog. Its motto is to know Christ and him crucified. There I have hundreds of Bible study articles, devotionals, book reviews, as well as analysis on current events and how we are to live as Christ bearers in this present evil age. Also there you can check out my new recent book that was just published this year called The New Testament Revival of Western Christianity, How to Restore the Love, Leadership, and Learning that the Apostles taught. I think it would be a blessing to you. You can get a PDF version for a very limited price there, and you can also find it on Amazon in print and Kindle editions. Again, it's bearingchrist.blog, to know Christ and him crucified. And we're back looking at the Northwest Ordinance in 1787, the ordinance itself. So Section 1 of the ordinance states, "Be it ordained by the United States in Congress assembled that the said territory, for the purposes of temporary government, be one district, subject, however, to be divided into two districts, as future circumstances may, in the opinion of Congress, make it expedient." So just introduction there. And then it goes on to talk about the laws regarding inheritance of the land to the settlers' descendants. It appoints a governor who is given 1,000 acres of land while he is the governor of the territory. It establishes a secretary who has 500 acres of land, and then it establishes a court of judges who also get land while they are holding that office. And it directs them to make laws of the territory that will be consistent with the laws of the states that are already established. The governor is, in Section 6, he is given the title of Commander-in-Chief of the militia, And magistrates are to be appointed in the next section for each county or township, excuse me. And they are to be legislated, are to be directed by a assembly of the territory. Let's see here. What representation is established for Congress in Section 9 for places that have 5,000 free male inhabitants, and they have given proof to the governor, and they are to elect a representative for this territorial assembly. Then it gives the outlines, the requirements for these representatives, their term limit. Then it talks about the legislature more in detail. Let's see here. I just want to note these specific words in Section 13. And for extending the fundamental principles of civil and religious liberty, which form the basis whereon these republics, their laws and constitutions are erected, to fix and establish those principles as the basis of all laws, constitutions, and governments which forever hereafter shall be formed at the said territory, to provide also for the establishment of states and permanent government therein, and for their admission to a share in the federal councils on an equal footing with the original states, at as early periods as may be consistent with the general interest. It is hereby ordained and declared by the authority aforesaid that the following articles shall be considered as articles of compact between the original states and the people and states in the said territory, and forever remain unalterable unless by common consent. And then it gives these articles. Now these are the important things. The articles it's basically like the Constitution of the territory. And I want to point out, I've been saying that this territory is one big government basically, but it was intended, as we'll probably get into, that this territory would be divided up into at least 3 and not, I don't believe, more than 5 states. So they were intending to, once they got enough people moved in, they would establish their local governments, and then once they reached a certain point of population, which according to the ordinance in Article 5, the population was determined to become eligible for statehood was 60,000 people. Although there is a exception to that if the Congress thought it expedient for the territory to be made a state without that number of people. But so here we get into the articles, and these are very important because they talk about religious liberty. They talk about the establishment of schools, of education. In fact, the ordinance mentions that the towns should establish schools for education. So let's get to Article 1 of Section 14. It says, quote, "No person demeaning himself in a peaceable and orderly manner." Now, demeaning doesn't mean belittling himself or embarrassing himself. Here it means acting, just simply acting in such a way, in a peaceable and orderly manner. "No person acting like that shall ever be molested on account of his mode of worship or religious sentiments in the said territory." So you have freedom of religion right there. In the next article, you have right to trial by jury, right of habeas corpus, the prohibition against cruel and unusual punishments. And Article 3, this is one of the more important articles. It says, quote, "Religion, morality, and knowledge, being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. The utmost good faith shall always be observed toward the Indians. Their lands and property shall never be taken from them without their consent, and in their property, rights, and liberty they shall never be invaded or disturbed unless in just and lawful wars authorized by Congress. But laws founded in justice and humanity shall from time to time be made for preventing wrongs being done to them and for preserving peace and friendship with them. So, right there, the first sentence, notice it says religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind. Schools and means of education shall forever be encouraged. Now, what's the implication in that sentence? That schools and the means of education teach religion and morality. So that they had religious education. For the most part, we have to remember they were Protestant. They at least claimed to be Protestants, and at the very least, they usually claimed some allegiance to Christianity, whether it was genuine or not. And then the prohibition against harming or mistreating the Indians. Unfortunately, as you look at the history here, from the beginning of the settlement in around 1784, 85, and for several years afterward, there were various wars, battles that were fought against the Indians there because they did not want to give up the property, and they didn't want to live next to white people, European people who were establishing these settlements and living in a way that was completely contrary to the way that most of them lived. The next article talks about the states that will later be formed in the territory to establish constitutions that are in conformity to the national constitution, and also that they would have to pay taxes to help with the federal debt, the debt of the National Congress. And in Article 5, it talks about the number of states, not less than 3 and no more than 5 states. And it says here specifically that the boundaries of the states, as soon as Virginia shall alter her act of cession and consent to the same, shall become fixed and established as follows. So, to wit, this is the territory it's talking about. Quote, the western state in the said territory shall be bounded by the Mississippi, the Ohio, and Wabash rivers, a direct line drawn for the Wabash and Post Vincents due north to the territorial line between the United States and Canada, and by the said territorial line to the Lake of the Woods and Mississippi. The middle state shall be bounded by the said direct line, the Wabash from Post Vincents to the Ohio River, by the Ohio, by direct line, drawn due north from the mouth of the Great Miami, I'm guessing that's a river, to the said territorial line, and by the said territorial line. The eastern states shall be bounded by the last mentioned direct line, the Ohio, Pennsylvania, and the said territorial line. And then it gives another boundary for other states that will have the line drawn through the southerly bend or extreme of Lake Michigan. And again, it establishes a requirement that these new states form republican constitutions and governments. And it says at the end of this Article 5, so far as it can be consistent with the general interests of the Confederacy, such admission shall be allowed at an earlier period and when there may be a less number of free inhabitants in the state than 60,000. So if the National Congress decides they want to make a state that has less than 60,000 people, they're free to do so. Now, Article 6 is the article on slavery. It says, quote, there shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in the said territory. Otherwise then, in the punishment of crimes whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. Provided always that any person escaping into the same from whom labor or service is lawfully claimed in any one of the original states, such fugitive may be lawfully reclaimed and conveyed to the person reclaiming his or her labor or service as aforesaid. So, again, the Congress is not getting rid of slavery in all of the states. Remember, at this time, they are not even calling the country the United States. It's that they are met together as a national government. It's a confederacy of states. So they don't have a central federal government. It's simply they have representatives from the various states that are agreeing on things. Again, remember, they don't even have at this time a president yet. They are drawing up the Constitution at this very time in July of 1787. And then at the end here, but I'm sorry, going back to that slavery clause. Again, they outlaw slavery in the territory, unless it is as a just punishment. However, if there is an escaped slave that goes to the territory, and he has a master in a state that is already a state, then he can be reclaimed by his master and gone back to the master. And then at the end here, it repeals the 1784 ordinance. And then also I want to point out at the end here, the way, the last sentence, how this ordinance ends. It says, done by the United States in Congress assembled the 13th day of July in the year of our Lord, 1787, and of their sovereignty and independence, the 12th. So 12 years after 1775, or 1776. But it's the year of our Lord. Who is our Lord? Our Lord Jesus. Remember these governors, these representatives, most of them acknowledged the legitimacy of Christianity and the God of the Bible, at the very least, if not expressly submitting themselves to Jesus Christ. But that's the Northwest Ordinance, a brief outline of it. Again, it's important because it established really precedent for example, the Bill of Rights, for the Constitution, for religious liberty, justice, and also a way that territories. This is the way that territories would be divided up and then be allowed into the United States as duly constituted states with representatives that were allowed to go to Congress to be a part of the United States Congress. So that's the Northwest Ordinance. It would not really officially go into effect until I think 1789, and the territory would not really be begun to be settled until, let's see, 1788. It was officially, kind of officially settled, with a settlement by the Ohio Company called Marietta. And so you have settlers going into the territory at this time, and the Ohio government divvying up the land, and the Congress of Confederacy is getting money, is supposed to get money from these lands, from the purchase of the land. And so the new government it's expanding westward. It is establishing its own form of government. It is establishing a way that it will continue to include states into the Union. And I think most importantly, it is establishing another precedent, another encouragement to religious liberty, and also the establishment of religious and Christian-based education. And also it has a precedent for the prohibition of slavery. And all these things would continue on throughout the rest of the 1700s and into the early 1800s. And the Constitution of the United States, of course, would be ratified. Looking at my own copy here, exactly the date on that same year in September, September 17th. That's when the Constitution was ratified. So next time, I think I might at least include another historical event that happened in July, hundreds of years ago, in the 400s AD, the Council of Ephesus. And I will continue our look at the American Revolution itself, the actual revolution. I'll try to do it next episode. Not entirely sure. But keep listening to The King's Hand in History. If you have recommendations for topics I should cover, if you have questions, if you have comments, you can email me at chris.g.vandusen@gmail.com. Or you can contact me on Facebook. We have a Facebook group called The King's Hand in History Students. You can go there and ask to join. Please pray for this if you're a Christian, this endeavor. And please also, if you appreciate this content, I have lots of episodes besides this covering the past 2,000 years of history. If you appreciate this content, though, please subscribe for more. And please share it. And we are also on Apple Podcasts and on YouTube as well. So until next time, thanks for listening to this episode. And look for the King's Hand in history and everything. And proclaim his glorious deeds. God bless.